Hello, Internet, your friendly neighborhood gremlin here, and today we're going back to fairy tale land. And today we're inspired by my favorite fairy tale, Little Red Riding Hood. Kyle was objectively not my first choice, but after several days of trying to acquire a wolf, he was the first one who showed up. And I mean, realistically, none of the wolves were perfect. Maybe Dobie was probably the best option, but we're taking what we got. The beginning of this build is pretty rough because I feel so attached to Little Red Riding Hood that I really wanted it to be perfect. So we spend a lot of time looking at walling and flooring because I kind of wanted it to be wood, but I also wanted it to be dark. My main objective was to make it look like a cabin in the woods. So we end up settling with stone walls and then that stacked wood wall on the one side closest to the kitchen. So while we're faffing about here for quite a bit, I thought I would tell you about some of the more famous or prominent versions of Little Red Riding Hood. We can start, of course, with the Grimm Brothers version, which is maybe the most popular. Certainly the one that inspired Into the Woods, which is my favorite musical. This version is pretty straightforward. Little Red Riding Hood heads into the woods to bring her grandma some bread. She meets the wolf. He suggests she pick flowers for her grandmother while he runs off and heads to the grandmother's house before she does. Eats the grandmother and takes her place. Little Red arrives. She comes in. "Oh, grandmother, what big teeth you have! All the better to eat you with, my dear." And he eats Little Red Riding Hood, and then the woodman comes and cuts both Little Red and Granny out of the stomach of the wolf before occasionally filling it with rocks, which is actually a thing that shows up in more than one fairy tale. And then, of course, you have the Charles Perrault version, which deviates only slightly. Instead of suggesting she pick flowers, the wolf tells her to take another path, and they're racing to grandmother's house. And then, of course, in the end, nobody saves her. He just eats her. And then we have the moral at the end of the story saying, "Don't talk to strangers because not all wolves are wearing fur." Okay, I'm going to stop for a moment to explain slightly what I'm going to do here because it's going to take a while for me to figure out that it doesn't work. Essentially, I'm trying to make like a 4-poster bed that has the curtains around it because in my head, that's what it looks like, and that's why Little Red can't see her grandmother very well until she gets closer. However, it's just not going to work. The curtains don't open quite wide enough, and it just ends up looking kind of clunky, so we'll give that up in a minute. Now, back to the stories. The last tale we're going to talk about is usually just called The Grandmother, sometimes referred to as The Grandmother's Tale. And while my fairy tale textbooks sort of attribute this to Paul Delarue as the man who edited the collection it was pulled from, the website I'm going to link below with some versions of Little Red Riding Hood, in case you're curious, just sort of attributes it to France. In this tale, after telling the wolf she's headed to her grandmother's house, the wolf asks if she's taking the path of needles or the path of pins. This is just one of those sort of metaphorical things. Some people say puberty, some people say domestic tasks. There's a whole lot of debate going on. If you're interested, look it up. The next deviation comes when Little Red arrives at her grandmother's house, and after saying she has some milk and cake, the wolf, disguised as her grandmother, says to put it in the pantry and grab the bottle of wine and the meat and to have a snack. It is typically described slightly earlier in the tale that when the wolf was eating the grandmother, he sets aside some of her blood in the wine bottle and some of the meat. And now we have Little Red Riding Hood's unknowing consumption of her grandmother. Again, this is one of those metaphorical things that you can talk about. Today, however, we're just sticking with the straightforward kind of deal. Our final deviation, and the reason that this tale is in fact my favorite version, is how Little Red Riding Hood escapes the wolf. Here, after getting in bed with her grandmother and realizing her grandmother is in fact a wolf, Little Red is scared, but also clever. And so she asks to go to the bathroom. The wolf is reluctant, but eventually agrees as long as she ties a string to her ankle so she cannot get away. However, after exiting the cabin, Little Red ties that string to the trunk of a tree and escapes, which, and I'm sure you can see why, is obviously the superior version, at least in my opinion. Though I should warn you, if you go read this tale, there's a little bit more inappropriate things happening, which I've left out for the sake of YouTube. I do suppose this is not entirely necessary, as I'm not monetized, and so I do not have to worry about being demonetized. I have heard that YouTube sometimes shows videos that class into this section to fewer people, and I would like people to see the video. I do think it actually comes out quite well. I'm really very proud of it. It does take a while to get there, but I promise you, when we do get there, it's going to be worth it. Do you guys have a favorite fairy tale? Let me know in a comment down below. I'd love to hear about it. Also, maybe which fairy tale you'd like me to do next in this series, because I am hoping it will be a series. To be fair, I think Goldilocks is the best performing video on my channel at the minute, which isn't really saying anything, but still true. And now we're just trying to figure out what we're gonna do with the rest of the house, and still trying to make those stupid curtains work. I promise, we will get over that eventually. Soon, I think, actually. The problem is that in my head, grandmother's cabin is literally just like a kitchen and then a bed with a fireplace nearby, which, as I'm sure you can see why, doesn't really lend itself to be an Animal Crossing build, or a build of any kind that is particularly interesting. And so we give her a living room, and then also the pantry is what's going to be behind the kitchen there. Eventually, when I get smart and realize that's the thing that I should be doing, includes the planned talking points for the video. So I guess back to talking about the build. Please do let me know how you feel about the pillars that end up just diagonally across the room here, which isn't very practical. But had I put the pillar in the matching spot where it would make sense, it was blocking the fireplace, which was extremely inconvenient. And now we're going to try and figure out this bottom left corner here. We are going to try for a little bit to put in 2 chairs, but we accept our fate eventually. I'm also then going to try and make the other chair green, because looking at that patchwork chair, I think the whole point of it is that it's like patchworked, so they wouldn't both be identical. The green, however, is a very bad idea. It looks way too bright in this lovely little home. And now we gotta put a table in there, because tables are important, always, especially in Animal Crossing, because they mean you can put things on them. Though the table is going to move to the other side of the chair in a minute when I discover plants. But we are getting closer to the fun part of the build, which is the miscellaneous things. Maybe tell me down below how you imagine Granny's cabin would look. Here we're going to finally add our final pillar, but they do end up perfectly diagonally across from one another, which I think is nice. Maybe it hides the weirdness to the fact that the pillars are in fact diagonally across the room instead of normal pillar places. I'm going to spend a bunch of time looking for a pattern for this cutting board, but the cutting board doesn't make it into the final build. So I suppose that was entirely a waste. But now we're just pulling out all the things that I think I want, like bread, because Little Red brings bread. And then I'm actually going to use that tomato juice as the blood, because while we do have wine bottles, and I do put the wine bottles in the build, they're very clearly empty, and it just didn't sort of click in my head the same way, and I wanted people to be like, oh, blood. Though, I mean, of course, people looking at it are going to be like, oh, tomato juice. So how effective this plan may have been is questionable. Let me know down below if you thought the tomato juice was a good idea or a royally stupid one. And yes, I am going to spend this entire video asking you to tell me things down below in hopes that someone may finally comment. Sorry. But also, like, not sorry. The next problem item that I'm absolutely insistent on using are these carnations. I think in my head, it was like these are the flowers that Little Red was bringing her grandmother, but they wouldn't have come in a basket with a ribbon had she picked them in the forest. But that's what we're going for, and we're accepting the fact that we shoved them on the fireplace, and while they don't look perfect, they sort of work, right? Tell me they work, please. And now we are going to arrive at the pantry, which I do think was one of my more clever ideas, especially given that it wasn't really inspired by anybody. I just kind of pulled it out of my ass. I do think it works very well. Mostly I just wanted more space to put more items because I am addicted to putting items on surfaces in Animal Crossing. Now we are going to get to discover that there is really no meat in Animal Crossing, only fish. And so here I am pulling out all the things that may have looked most like raw human meat, which is absolutely not the kind of thing I thought I'd be saying on my YouTube videos. Let me know if you think I succeeded, or if I should have chosen something else. And then the poor jam is going to end up on the floor, which is maybe sad. But if you consider the only kind of pantry-esque thing I've ever had in my life, which is in fact like a cold storage room, which is like where you keep preserves and other things, there's always been things on the floor. And now we're going to add one final pillar to the mess that is the pillars, and this one sort of throws everything off, but the wall looks really unfinished without it, and I couldn't deal with it, so now we have an extra pillar. Here I'm scrolling through trying to find someone to play Little Red, and we end up with Deirdre. Let me know who you would have cast as Little Red, given any of the Animal Crossing characters. It doesn't have to be ones that I have photographs of. Also let me know who you'd have play Granny. I'd love to know. I'm absolutely dying of heat. Essentially, the air conditioning in our house isn't working at the moment, and I obviously have to turn the fan off to record. And on top of that, I sort of decided that maybe one of the problems people were having and why they were clicking off was because I just ramble so much. So I'm trying to be more pointed and sort of cut out most of the weird, awkward pauses that I have, because apparently I start talking and then I stop being able to breathe and have to pause in the middle of the sentence to breathe. Because it's been a while since I've actually sung anything, and I have a 0 diaphragm support now. I'm calling this a casualty of podcasts. I hung those sort of dried flowers over near the kitchen because I thought maybe they could be dried herbs, and here we are getting some paintings to go on the wall because you have to have things on the wall. It's absolutely necessary. Why we thought it was a good idea to have a bunch of dried flowers there by Granny's bed is unclear, but I like it. I also kind of thought the knives on the wall was a nice touch. It would have been nice if we could have had one like on the counter all bloody and stuff, but Animal Crossing. Sometimes you just have to take what you can get. This, however, is about the extent of our wall decor, and then we put in a couple of the milk glass lamps. We have to try the drapery because, of course, we do. Somewhere it will fit, eventually. And to be fair, I didn't try to put any bugs in this build, so now that we've got the bugs, maybe now we can move on. Our new conquered project is that drapery. Now, the outside of the build is significantly less successful. I didn't entirely know what I wanted, so I just kind of added a bunch of trees and then a very badly laid out path to grandmother's house with some little garden on the side and some flowers near the trees and a little picnic blanket because everybody needs a picnic blanket. Though, if Granny's sick in bed, I don't know who's using the picnic blanket. Maybe she has some of those little elves from that story about the shoekeeper and the elves who come and help her do her housework, and they take breaks on the picnic blanket outside so they don't disturb Granny while she's sleeping. Now we're just adding a nice little bush hedge, and we're trying to alternate the flowers and not flowers because I only wanted to use the one bush. I didn't even want to use the one that was the other color of the same bush. Now we get to struggle with trying to build Granny a house that looks like a hut, which, I don't know. Let me know how successful you think I did. I just kind of like the straw roof, which is in fact entirely the only reason we went with that house shape. I just didn't record me trying to figure out how to lay down the path because A, it's bad, B, it took a while, and C, this video is already really long. I mean, it was longer, but I actually sped everything up to 500% instead of the usual 400% because I didn't have that much to say, and it's so hot that I'm just ready to be done with this voiceover. And dear old Granny grows entirely, exclusively pumpkins. We do give her a couple of orange pumpkins just to sort of mix it up, I guess. I don't know why she grows pumpkins. I don't know what she's doing with the pumpkins. Maybe she's selling them to the fairy godmother. It is unclear. Maybe let me know what you think down below. Is Granny hustling the fairy godmother, or is she just a kind, nice old lady who really enjoys pumpkins? And here, of course, we have our obligatory picnic blanket, because apparently I can't do an exterior without one now. I do apologize for that, but exteriors are still really scary for me, and I don't know what I'm doing. And here we are trying to use this stupid bottled beverage, but it's gonna go away real fast because it just looks like it sticks out and is like super modern compared to everything else in the build. And then we scroll to try and find those stupid decorative bottles, which I couldn't find, so I had to go to the recently used section because I'm apparently exactly the opposite of a Hufflepuff. I also give her some of these potted flowers, which again is maybe questionable. I don't know that it was a good idea, but it was a thing that I did. Here you may notice Kyle's already dressed in his little grandma outfit. That's mostly just because I wanted him to be dressed in it for the reveal. We'll have the actual outfit shot afterwards. I really struggled trying to get him a grandma-esque disguise outfit. Let me know how successful you think I was. It was really the only option that we had because none of the nightgowns look like old lady nightgowns. But this concludes the end of our video. So like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see y'all tomorrow. Goodbye!